Today, we're digging into the incredibly complex and just tragic case of New Jersey versus Paul Caneiro. It's been more than 7 years of intense legal battles, but a trial is finally happening for the murder of an entire family. This is the story of how we got here. It all starts with two brothers, Paul and Keith Caneiro. They were successful business partners living pretty close to each other, only about 11 miles apart. And it also starts with two fires that were reported just hours apart at each of their homes. But what first responders found, it was a scene that prosecutors would later describe as one of the most brutal in the county's history. Keith Caneiro, his wife Jennifer, and their two young children, Jesse and Sophia, the entire family was gone. And the timing of all this just makes it that much more heartbreaking. It all happened in the early morning hours of November 20th, 2018, just 2 days before Thanksgiving. So what exactly happened on that horrific day? Let's walk through the timeline of events exactly as investigators have laid it out. Okay, so the prosecution's timeline kicks off around 3 a.m. That's when neighbors near Keith Caneiro's mansion report hearing gunshots. Then, just 2 hours later, a fire is called in from Paul Caneiro's house. Now, this is crucial. Paul and his family get out there unharmed. It isn't until 12:38 in the afternoon that the final alarm comes in. A landscaper sees smoke pouring out of Keith's mansion. And when first responders get there, they find Keith's body on the lawn. Inside that burning house, they would soon discover the rest of his family. Before we get any deeper into the legal case, it's just so important to remember who was lost here. Keith, he was a self-made tech CEO, a Columbia grad. His wife, Jennifer, was really involved in their kids' school, loved throwing family parties. Their son, Jesse, was only 11, and he was a total history buff. And their daughter, Sophia, was a bright-eyed 8-year-old who loved to bake. Within days, investigators had homed in on a single suspect, Keith's own older brother, Paul. So why? Why would prosecutors believe that one brother would just annihilate the other's entire family? Well, they argue it all came down to one thing: money. You see, the two brothers were business partners in a tech firm. But let's be clear, the ownership was anything but equal. Keith owned 90%, while Paul only owned 10%. Now, according to court documents, right before the murders, Keith had discovered that about $90,000 was missing from the business, and he suspected Paul was the one who took it. And this number right here, that's Paul Caneiro's annual salary from their shared businesses. On November 19th, the very night before the murders, Keith sent an email, and in that email, he said he was cutting off this salary, which is being paid to Paul's wife, until that missing money was found. Prosecutors are going to argue that that email was basically a death sentence. So, with that alleged motive locked in, the state then spent the next 7 years building its case. Let's shift gears now and look at the actual evidence they're planning to show the jury. So, what is the actual tangible evidence that connects Paul Caneiro to these horrific crimes? Well, the prosecution's case really stands on several key pillars. The state is going to show security footage from Paul's own house that they say shows him near his DVR, the thing that records the camera footage, at 1:29 a.m., literally moments before it just stops recording. Then, a neighbor's camera allegedly catches a car leaving and coming back during that 2-hour window when the murders are believed to have happened. When police searched his car, they found a 9mm barrel and a silencer. And prosecutors will argue that the fire at Paul's own home, that wasn't a separate attack at all. They'll say it was a deliberate ruse to make it look like the whole Caneiro family was being targeted by someone else. Then you have the ballistics evidence, which provides a really direct link. Investigators found these Fiocchi 9mm shell casings right near Keith's body. And when they searched Paul's basement, what do they find? A box of Fiocchi 9mm rounds. The head stamps, those are the little markings on the bottom of the casing, they were a perfect match. But honestly, the most chilling piece of physical evidence, it came from a plastic container found in Paul's basement. Inside were a pair of bloody jeans and a latex glove. And here's the part that's just gut-wrenching. DNA testing on that blood came back as a match for his 8-year-old niece, Sophia. So with all of that evidence, you're probably asking, why on earth did it take over 7 years to get to trial? Well, that's because the defense has been fighting the state's case tooth and nail every single step of the way. Let's take a look at their side of the story. From day one, Paul Caneiro has absolutely maintained his innocence. His defense team has hammered this one key point. Just like his attorney said, there is no confession. He has never once admitted to any involvement. In fact, he told police he was at home sleeping when the murders happened. Now, the biggest legal fight before the trial was all about that security system DVR. See, police grabbed it from Paul's garage during the fire at his house, but they did it without a warrant. They argued they had to act fast under a legal idea called exigent circumstances, which is basically the belief that evidence is about to be destroyed. And this whole fight over the DVR really shows you how long this legal process can take. At first, the defense actually won. A court suppressed the evidence back in June 2025. But the state didn't give up. They appealed it all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court. And ultimately, the Supreme Court reversed the decision, saying the seizure was justified. And what that means is that crucial footage will be shown to the jury. All of which brings us right here, to today. With all the evidence finally admitted and years of legal motion settled, this entire case now comes down to a jury of 12 people. So what exactly is at stake? Well, Paul Caneiro is looking at a 16-count indictment. The most serious, obviously, are the 4 counts of first-degree murder. If he's convicted on even one of those, the 59-year-old faces a mandatory sentence of life in prison, with absolutely no possibility of parole. Put simply, he would die in prison. But as this trial begins, it is so important to remember this fundamental principle of our entire legal system. Paul Caneiro is presumed innocent. He doesn't have to prove a thing. The whole burden, 100% of it, rests on the state to prove its case. So in the end, that jury is going to have to wrestle with some really tough questions. Does the state's timeline actually make sense with no gaps? Is that financial motive really strong enough? Can the defense poke holes in how that DNA evidence was handled? And maybe the biggest question of all, can the state's case hold up without a single confession? After they've heard every piece of evidence and every argument, the jury has to answer that one final question. Has the state proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? It is the highest standard in our justice system. And in this case, a man's life and the memory of a family is hanging right there in the balance.